Hello, and welcome to Presenting, a podcast where we chat about various topics related to role-playing games, typically Paizo products such as Pathfinder or Starfinder, but also others. I'm John Godick, and with me today is Isabelle Thorne. Welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here.
So, Isabelle is a longtime freelance author, game designer, and editor with over 36 credits to her name, the majority being Pathfinder, Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and Starfinder for Paizo. Isabelle is currently working on the Luminant Age campaign setting for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. You can reach Isabelle at Calindalara on Twitter, as well as on the Paizo forums, where she has over 10,000 posts. It's actually over 11,000, but I thought 10,000 sounds like a big number already.
Nice
So
round number.
yeah. So Isabelle, can you talk about your background and your journey to becoming an RPG author, game designer, and editor?
Well, ever since I was but a wee lass, and really before I knew about the latter part of that, I wanted to be a writer of fantasies, uh, very much in the vein of like Tolkien. And although I don't think I'll ever have his grasp of the academic language, but for a while that dream kind of was left by the wayside as I, dealt with education and day-to-day life. And it wasn't until I actually came out as transgender that I really started sort of feeling like I had a shot again.
Mm-hmm.
It's very curious how that happens. How before everything just seems sort of meh. But so I put some stuff together for one of the Wayfinders. I want to say number 16.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I kind of stumbled into it. Uh, I wrote up some things for Wayfinder. They accepted the one and politely left behind the other. And one day I was on Twitter in Jessica Price's mentions, just
Mm-hmm.
loitering. Uh, and I was more or less fished out of there by a gentleman named Robert Brooks, uh, who was like, "I'm doing this Kickstarter third party setting. Do you have any writing samples?" And I was like, "Technically, yes."
Mm-hmm.
Sent those over to him. He was delighted. Early on, there was a lot of that. I would show people, my first things, and they would just be astonished. And I don't know how that happened really. So from there, I worked on his the Aethera campaign setting,
Mm-hmm.
which I
Mm-hmm.
believe is still out there somewhere.
It is. I have it on my shelf, actually, from
Excellent.
Legendary Games.
Uh, yeah, I did a few things in there, mostly things to do with the Fae or the Shadow.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the Chitons there really were my baby. But from there, I more or less hung around on the fringes of the industry for a little while until one day Mr. Stevens, Owen Casey Stevens,
Mm-hmm.
messaged me and was like, "Do you want to write on a player companion?" And I was like, "Yes." And things just kind of snowballed from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I interviewed Tim Nightingale a couple years ago, and one of the things he mentioned is that Wayfinder, they designed it as an entry point for new authors into the industry, and so you're another example of somebody who's gotten through that way. The start. Also interviewed Owen Casey Stevens, and one of the things that he mentioned is he worked on the player companion line, and that was another point for people to get started at Paizo. So
Mm,
it's funny because you've been author longer than most of the people I've interviewed, and so you've taken that older traditional path
mm,
compared to how a lot of other folks now seem to have done it more through like networking or maybe a couple open calls. Some folks used to also get into RPG Superstar,
mm.
so that was
I
another path.
did try out for one of the RPG superstars. I want to say 2015.
Mhm.
Uh, my item is still floating around somewhere in there. It's adequate.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I can't really imagine making it sort of through that process today.
Right.
Then again, I couldn't really imagine it back then. It really was just like serendipity from
Hmm.
start to finish.
Wow.
I did a bit of the networking too. I went to PaizoCon the year we were doing Aethera,
Hmm.
and every year since up until the pandemic.
Yeah, the pandemic has changed it for a lot of folks, myself included. I miss PaizoCon. I'm really close to where it usually is held, and I cannot go because of my immunocompromised situation. So
Um,
I'm bummed
Understandable.
about that. Yeah. Now you've worked on literally dozens and dozens of Pathfinder and Starfinder projects, um, probably more than anybody else I've talked to outside of maybe Owen Casey Stevens. I don't know how many he's
Oh my
worked on,
god.
right?
That
Um,
man is a machine. I
yeah,
used to joke he
but
had 9 jobs.
yeah, I think he still does. So,
Yeah.
but how have you managed to become so prolific as a freelancer?
Oh, on the one hand, I'm inclined to again say I have no idea. It was probably luck. Uh, Part of it may have been like not to go off on a just complete ego trip here, but
It's
I think
okay,
quality did have something to do with it.
right?
Uh, Especially early on, a lot of people sort of followed my work specifically.
Mm,
A lot of people took a very direct interest in it. There were people who would say, "Did you write this section? Because it's my favorite, and it feels like you did." And
yeah.
often, I did.
Mhm. So people started recognizing your style, even for uncredited kind of pieces. That's neat. Yeah.
Indeed, I've been described by one of my fellow freelancers as, I believe the words they used were ephemeral and elegant in my
Hmm. Hmm.
presentation and my word choices.
Hmm. Those are nice words by themselves too. Well, so even so you've done a really good job, and it seems like people must have noticed that and
Mm.
wanted to keep having you do work.
I
So, I
also
mean, it's not just
had,
being a great writer, but being connected, you know?
oh, yes. I actually had the advantage also that at the time, James Jacobs was headlining
Hmm.
a lot of the Pathfinder rulebook line, as a
Hmm.
lot of the design team and such were busy toiling in secret to give us the second edition.
Hmm.
So, and he was just happy to give me as many words as I
Hmm.
could ask for. Like, I think my second assignment with him was 16,000 words.
Wow, that's a lot for a second assignment. Yeah, yeah, for
And
sure.
he was also responsible for my biggest assignment of all time, which was Planar Adventures,
Hmm.
which I believe by word count, I wrote 1/6 of that book.
Wow. Wow. Very cool. What's kind of your favorite thing to write for Paizo? I mean, you've written quite a
Hmm.
lot of different things, both Pathfinder and Starfinder. Do you have a particular favorite?
So another one of my advantages, perhaps, in terms of the prolificness, was that I can and will write anything. I
Okay.
generally didn't have a lot of trouble adapting to different design types. If they
Hmm.
needed monsters, I could do monsters and so on. For favorites, though, in Pathfinder First Edition, it was definitely the archetypes, because
Hmm.
archetype design was this very beautiful art, because
Hmm.
it was a package deal. You couldn't just take, a dedication and a couple of feats to get by.
Right.
You were in it for the whole thing. So you could do a lot in terms of like this ability counterbalances out this ability,
Hmm.
and this kind of pays for this ability.
Hmm.
So it was this very interesting sort of microcosm of design.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because one of the things I've always been fascinated by in design is how things interact.
Hmm.
Like with a lot of my designs, I thought of, okay, what are people going to use this with? What feats are they going to take with this archetype? And on what classes? And how is all that going to work together? And how do I want it to work together?
Right. Right. So thinking the full meal, how a player is going to use this rather than just the thing by itself. I think that's a great
Exactly.
approach. Yeah.
For Starfinder, I actually haven't had that much experience with it. Uh, of my, I believe, 42 credits, only 8 are Starfinder. And most of those have been either flavor focused articles, like the Velstrak article in issue 11, or simple monster entries. The only uh, RPG line rulebook, core rulebook I've been on there was the original Alien Archive,
Hmm.
where, among other things, I did the Marikoi
Oh,
and the
very cool.
Swarm. I was
Hmm.
very
Hmm.
proud of them. But of what I've experienced for Starfinder, it's probably monster design,
Hmm.
although designing, I don't know what they're calling them now, species, probably.
Yeah. Species. Yeah.
uh, Designing species just from the perspective of like their society, how their
Hmm.
flavor informs their statistics.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, the two I did are in, I believe, AP 21, Husk World, from the Attack of the
Hmm.
Swarm! Exclamation
Hmm.
point adventure path. And uh, with those, I was very interested in kind of approaching these strange cultures that had been through, in some cases, very traumatic events.
Hmm.
Uh, an entire an entire populace of construct people who were severed from their memories during the gap,
Hmm.
and a sort of species of highly communalistic serpent women. So it
Wow.
was very interesting putting all that together, even in the little space I had. Because,
Yeah.
word count is what it is.
Right. Right. So you mentioned you only have 8 credits for Starfinder, which is a lot for a
I know,
lot of folks, by the way.
poor me.
Yeah. But still, you've kind of gone between 3 different game systems, Pathfinder, Pathfinder Second Edition, and Starfinder.
Mhm.
What are some of the challenges that you face both going between the systems and then overall kind of playing the different roles as a writer, game designer, and as an editor?
So, for the most part, I never really had that much difficulty with the sort of shifting of gears. Uh, since, I don't know, it's hard to explain. For some reason, I just sort of very easily shift to a different skill set.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The difficulty was I was just absurdly like in-depth experienced with the third edition D&D game engine. So
Mm-hmm.
for Pathfinder 1E, I could kind of just make the system dance to my whim.
Right.
But Starfinder Starfinder is kind of this, don't tell Paizo I said this, although I'm sure they know it themselves. But it's kind of this clunky hybrid of
Mm-hmm.
where they were trying to go with PF2 while still
Yes.
kind of shackled to the math of PF1 through the bestiary system.
Right.
And it is very much sort of kind of hobbled by that in ways that I find kind of difficult.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
PF2 was struggle for a different reason. I was on a couple of the first Lost Omens books, particularly the character guide, and we didn't have the rules. and
Wow. Yeah. 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 Because it was still in playtest while you're doing that.
and they
Yeah.
wouldn't. Well, we were basically just sort of working with the best information we had at the time.
Right.
And for someone like me who is very very reliant on sort of precise knowledge in terms of how I do my designs, and who's very prideful about her work. Like for me, I struggle sometimes with the necessities of development because I'm really invested in like my vision for my work.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something I couldn't really rely on in that phase of design,
Mm-hmm.
having to just sort of work blind and rely on them to quote unquote fix it in post.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really struggled with those assignments. And I've kind of been struggling since then because just once you start, once you sort of lose your pace, lose your momentum,
Mm-hmm.
it can be a real struggle to sort of get back on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I have a particular problem with the deadlines. Frankly, it's astonishing I've gotten as many assignments as I have because even early on, I would occasionally need a 1 or 2 week extension.
Mm-hmm.
And in the sort of changeover era, that kind of grew and it hasn't really come back yet.
Well, you must write very well because normally, what I'm told is you have to be a person that they can get along with, person that writes very well, um, or and a person that gets everything on time. And if you have two of those three, then usually they'll keep working with you. So
And that
you
was,
must,
I think, where I
yeah,
am because,
yeah.
especially early on in my transition, really, I made an extra effort to be sort of it's hard to describe without sounding a bit silly, but as sweet and kind as I could manage.
Hmm.
And I think that really did make an impression upon them.
Hmm. Hmm. So, in addition to writing for Paizo now, I recently interviewed both Andrew and Mikkel or Michael about Luminant Age. And I just so happened I was just kind of picking people. They both had worked on it. And then I got to you, and it turns out that you've also worked on that campaign. So what role do you play with their project?
Hmm. So, from a sort of technical or title position, I'm doing some writing, but in part because of the issues I described with sort of deadlines and some of the associated stress and burnout issues,
Hmm.
uh, my writing footprint has been fairly minimal. For the most part, again, from a title standpoint, I'm working as the editor on the project, sort of making sure
Hmm.
everything gets smoothed out, everything looks as nice as it can. Fortunately, not to throw anyone under the bus here, but fortunately, my confederates on this project are more adept as writers than some of my previous clients, so it's not quite
Hmm.
as arduous a battle.
Hmm. Hmm.
From the creative standpoint, I would say I'm kind of the person in charge of more, which is to say, we are a, as I'm sure the others have mentioned, weird fantasy swashbuckling campaign.
Hmm.
So whenever we are discussing something to make the setting weird, I'm the one always looking at how can we make this more weird?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like what if instead of just, you know, a gas giant, it was a gas giant slowly collapsing into a star and then reforming.
Hmm.
And with the swashbuckling, uh, I tend to be. Mikhail has a very sort of understated sort of elegance and flair to his work. It's very witty, very,
Hmm.
but very subtle. My style is a lot more sort of bombastic and flourishy. I am the swashbuckler who is loud and in the middle of things.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's a big part of the role I play is just sort of punching up the ideas we have,
Hmm.
editing the words we have, and when I have the chance, I try to slip in some ideas of my own. One of the things I've really taken an interest in is sort of sprinkling seeds throughout the setting where
Hmm.
none of it is obvious, but if you can sort of look through it in detail and connect the dots, you might see the shape of something yet to come.
Hmm. Some nice foreshadowing. That's good. Very good. So it sounds like you all have developed a really, really cool and very detailed and rich
Mhm.
campaign environment here, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more and more of it coming out. What aspects of it in particular drew you to the project?
Most Mostly my inability to say no to anything resembling an opportunity to write, edit, or otherwise contribute. Like,
Hmm.
that's another thing with Paizo. In all my time with them, I think I turned down one project. And it was very
Hmm.
early on, around the time I had accepted that 16,000 word assignment.
Hmm.
Wes Schneider came to me like, "Do you want to be on this player companion?" And I'm like, I have so many words. I don't think
Mhm.
I can.
Mhm. Mhm.
So so yeah, one day Mikhail just came to me like, "Hey, I'm gonna do a campaign setting. You want to be part of it?" And I was like, "What do you think?" And so I kind of fell into the project. Uh, in terms of what sort of kept me invested in it, part of it is just the aforementioned sort of creative pride, sort of wanting to shepherd my ideas to fruition. Some of it is professional, wanting to show I can be a big part of something like this.
Mhm.
Some of it, in terms of like the I don't know if the others talked about like the inspirations, the sort of source material that we sort of drew. Uh,
No, not so much, no.
hmm. so I believe the two we most often list are Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind,
Mm.
both the film and manga, both of which I've consumed at this point for the project, and both of which are excellent. Uh, and the other is the Elder Scrolls Morrowind, which I have
Oh,
never had
interesting.
the pleasure of
Yeah.
playing, but I
Mhm.
have played so much Skyrim. I believe I have
Mhm.
literally 3,000 hours of Skyrim on record.
Wow.
It's it's legitimately a phase in my depression. Like
Mm.
like
Mhm.
depression, moping, like crushing despair, Skyrim. So one of the things I really took from that then was in Skyrim, you get to explore a lot of the what they call the Dwemer ruins, the dwarven ruins left behind when the dwarves all vanished in Morrowind because they poked the heart of a god or something. I'm new here, but and those ruins have this sense of alien majesty to them. There's this sense that something was here and is now just gone,
Mhm.
but what's left behind sort of continues to not really function but persist in its wake. And there's
Mhm.
something very beautiful about that.
Mhm.
And that's the sort of thing I'm trying to bring to this. How can we make these post-apocalyptic elements more poignant, more more sort of dramatic, more impactful upon the players, not just as challenges, but as ideas.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the other thing with regards to the weird is I have some particularly unusual interests and a sort of perpendicular approach to creative design that can result in some very bizarre and often very horrific elements.
Mm.
Uh, like going back to the Aethera campaign setting, uh, if you look at the chitons in there, which were basically Robert Brooks just told me, I want to have chitons as our main sort of outsider element. And
Mhm.
everything else, it was just go to town. And I did. But there you had like chitons made from sort of failed super soldier experiments, sort of
Mm.
fused together as sort of psychic weapons and sort of mental, what's the word, sort of the center of a mental web through all their fellow chitons.
Mhm.
You had you had the sort of beastmen, the Okanta,
Mhm.
sort of turned into gatherers that would go out and fetch fresh material. You had the plant people sort of turned into petrochemical nightmares.
Mhm.
And that's the sort of weird I tend to sort of dabble in the most.
Mhm.
One of the things I'm trying to challenge myself on for Luminant Age is a more varied approach to weird, more than just, horrific things, although there will be some horrific things. And in the sort of sci-fi to fantasy spectrum, I tend to land very far on the fantasy end.
Mhm.
The closest I get to sci-fi is like Star Wars, which has sort of the fantastical elements,
Right.
or occasionally some of the really classic sci-fi stuff, like Arthur C. Clarke.
Mhm. Mhm.
But for the most part, hard sci-fi has never been my thing. Whereas Mikhail comes down a little closer to that end.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of challenging myself to move in that direction, kind of meet him over there and
Mhm.
really bring my creativity to those ideas.
Mhm. Mhm. Very cool. So you've been at this for a number of years. What advice do you have for people interested in becoming a freelance writer or editor or game designer?
Oh, God help us. uh, so, I mean, the first thing I would say is don't be late on multiple assignments successively, but hopefully you won't. Uh, for the various elements, I kind of come at it from various sort of positions. Uh, in terms of the professional aspect, obviously, you want to be easy to work with. You want to be someone who really brings their all to a project. One of the things I did on a ton of projects actually was I would in my spare time go over other people's sections
Mhm.
at their option, of course, and just sort of offer my feedback and suggestions for improvement. Mhm. And sort of try and make the project a better place overall. And stuff like that, I think, is just really good if you can. And of course, the sort of professional aspects, be on time, be cool about like uh disclosure and not
Mhm.
letting things slip. Uh sort of all the basic stuff. As a game designer, uh and this kind of flows into the other ones as well, but what you want to do is be as familiar as you can with the content. One of
Mhm.
the things I brought to the table very early on, when I was still finding my feet with game balance, which some of my early stuff was, we still talk about the silk sworn. But the point is, uh, one of the things I brought was I knew just on instinct how to write to the Pathfinder style. I knew
Mhm.
what sort of phrasing you'd want for a feat that did X. I knew uh, what sort of voice you want to speak in for flavor.
Mhm.
Uh, and that's the sort of thing you can best get by just immersing yourself in the content. Just
Mhm.
read the books. Uh, in terms of getting to grips with the sort of technical aspects, the mechanical design, uh, my usual practice method is just to build characters, just build one character after another,
Hmm.
just figuring out how the pieces of the system mesh. As a writer, in terms of improving your quality of work, the best thing you can do by far is read. Read good books, read adult
Hmm.
books. Like, young adult is well and good, but it's probably not going to challenge someone who aspires to this sort of thing. You want to find books that are, if possible, above your level and sort of rise to meet them.
Hmm.
Uh, I have a few that I frequently frequently recommend to people. One of them, and I always feel like I have to throw an asterisk on this, is the novelization for Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith by Matthew Stover. Say what you will about the prequels, and many people have, but that book is just magnificent in terms of how it's written, how it explores the psychology of these characters going through this sort of
Hmm.
grand and dramatic fall, and in some cases, how the sort of subtle wit it has.
Hmm.
Stuff like that really just really helps you grow as a writer, and just read as much as you can as well, because at first you might have to sort of look at how things are put together,
Hmm.
how sentences are laid out, how ideas are presented, but eventually it will become second nature. uh, I was a skilled reader from an early age, so I don't have a ton of advice on how to actually become one. But and as an editor, honestly, it's kind of the same thing. I have no formal training as an editor whatsoever. I believe I barely passed my one English course in university. It was technical writing. I was bored out of my skull.
Hmm.
Uh, but again, read enough books and you'll see how things are supposed to look. That's really a key element of my strength, of my sort of strength as a writer, editor, designer. I can look at something and know how it's supposed to look. I can look
Hmm.
at a draft and go, okay, change this, 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 and this. And I
Hmm.
can write seamlessly in that or other voices.
Hmm.
Mm.
Cool.
Regarding the degree, by the way, I sometimes wonder if it's doing me any good in this field. I actually have a marketing degree.
Well, I would say I also have a marketing degree that if nothing else, how one presents oneself when they're doing work, that's marketing. We
Hmm.
we market ourselves all the time. We brand ourselves, and whether or not it's intentional, right, and whether or not it's effective, that's all still marketing.
Hmm.
So,
And
what's next for
especially as
Isabel? Oh,
freelancers, we
sorry.
have to, and
Yeah.
especially as freelancers, we have to be
Yes.
adept at that.
Hmm.
Because one of my other sort of unusual traits as an author is I almost never ask for work. I
Hmm.
don't even send emails, telling them I'm available. I just sort of sit here, just in this chair, staring at this computer screen, just waiting for the email to pop up.
And it seems to work.
It has so far. I'm hoping it
Yeah.
will again. But you
So,
had a question?
yeah. So, what's next for Isabel? What kind of cool things are you working on that you can actually talk about?
Oh, so I've got a couple of non-Paizo projects lined up. We've already talked about Luminant Age to some extent.
Hmm.
Uh, I'm also serving as lead editor and developer on a project that was recently kickstarted. Well, I say recently, it was like half a year ago now. Sinclair's Library.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Uh,
talked to James Beck about that. So
yes.
yeah, yeah,
I'm familiar with Mr. Beck's work.
yes.
Uh, and that was arguably one of the first times I asked for work. I'd say don't tell them I said this, but I said this to their face. So uh, I basically took one look at their Kickstarter page and went, I should offer my services.
They need a little bit of help here. Yes. No.
Just
Yeah.
I don't want to say it
Well,
was grim, but like
yeah.
it would
That's
not
funny.
look out of place in a Phrasman temple.
Yes. Yes.
And aside
Well.
from those, well, one of my other things is I'm trying desperately not to acquire any new work since
Hmm.
we've discovered that I have kind of a problem when I have too many sort of things going on. And it really contributes to the stress and the burnout as I kind of look this
Hmm.
way and that, trying to decide. So I've
Hmm.
kind of sworn off new projects for until I've got all the fires put out.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm technically also the a co-editor with Simone.
Hmm.
Yeah, uh, Simone Saleh, I think.
Simone Di Sali. I think it's
That could be.
yeah.
I communicate through text like 95% of the time, so
Yeah.
I have no idea how to pronounce anything.
Hmm.
Uh, I'm co-editor with them on the Queer Finder stuff on Pathfinder Infinite.
Hmm. Very
Uh,
cool.
we've only got a couple issues out thus far because we are a bunch of people making RPG projects. It
Hmm.
There's not a lot of iron discipline with the deadlines there.
Hmm. Hmm.
But the other thing I'm trying to do when I can manage to say no to enough work to find the time is with all that Paizo work I was doing, I never had much time to work on sort of my own creative projects.
Hmm.
So, one of the things I'm currently doing is trying to set aside some time to work on my own projects, particularly my fiction,
Hmm.
uh, fantasy, and other types of fantasy mostly. Uh, since I really want to sort of get myself out there in that field as well, really share some of these ideas I've been bottling up and half starting for like 8 years now,
Hmm. Hmm.
and finally get one or two of them to fruition. So, fingers crossed that at some point here, I'll actually finish one of those and manage to get it, up on Amazon or whatever. So that's kind of my aspiration at this point.
Well, it seems like you have a lot going on already and a lot to look forward to. So it's very good stuff. Well, Isabel, it's been great getting a chance to meet you and get to know you and have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Of course, and the feeling is very much mutual. Thank you for having me.